This episode of The Unstarving Musician is sponsored by Liner Notes. Want to learn from hundreds of musicians and industry pros I've spoken with for The Unstarving Musician? Sign up for Liner Notes, my curated email newsletter where I share the best insights and knowledge gems from these conversations, some of which have been featured on the podcast. From marketing and songwriting to touring and sync licensing, you'll get actionable tips delivered straight to your inbox every 2 weeks. Liner Notes Insider Deep Dive Edition will feature exclusive deep dives, detailed case studies, and premium content that goes beyond the podcast interviews. Sign up at unstarvingmusician.com/liner notes. It's free to get started, and you can unsubscribe at any time. Welcome to episode 323 of The Unstarving Musician. I'm Rabonzo, and this is my podcast. Coming to you from my home in Querétaro, Mexico. How are you? Where are you? And what are you wearing? This is what I'm wearing. If you're watching this on YouTube. My little YouTube experiment. Welcome to those of you watching on YouTube as I continue the video experiment, learning how to do this at your expense and peril. But in all seriousness, I hope you enjoy the video version, low tech and rough edited as it may be. Today, I am thrilled to bring a conversation with Maggie Stewart to you. She's an LA-based immigration lawyer who specializes in helping musicians and other entertainment artists navigate the complexities of touring in Canada from the immigration perspective in particular. Before we dive in, I should mention that there were some connectivity issues during our conversation, so parts may feel a little disjointed, although that may just be to me. I did a pretty good job of editing it, I think. We also continued our discussion after what was meant to be the main interview, but in doing so, we captured some valuable stuff that I cobbled into this episode. So if it sounds a little like it's not flowing, even though I think it does, that's why. In this episode, Maggie shares her 15 years of legal expertise on critical topics for any musician planning Canadian performances, including how to handle criminal convictions that might affect entry into Canada, work permit requirements and visa processes for international artists, border crossing do's and don'ts that could save your tour and your friendships with your tour mates, insurance and liability considerations when performing internationally, and more. While this conversation focuses on Canadian immigration, Maggie offers plenty of insights applicable to international touring in general. Whether you're a musician, manager, crew member, or agent, you'll find practical advice for ensuring smoother border crossings and legal compliance on your next tour. And a couple of side notes. The first one's a correction. In discussing liability considerations, I mentioned a couple of incidences, one of which was a tragic event involving a band that during our conversation I recalled as being a band named White Stripe, but that is incorrect. The band involved was actually Great White, a metal band. And also at the outset of our conversation, we talked for a few moments about the tragic Southern California fires. I included that because I was interested in Maggie's local perspective. So without further ado and delay, here's my conversation with Maggie Stewart of Mundial Law.
No, we've lived here about 10 years now, and we had fires. We're in Burbank. There were fires up in the hillsides, which is not uncommon. And, they're really adept at putting out those fires. They've got great teams and lots of like air support and things like that. I mean, the real issue with the fires that hit so badly earlier this year was that we had amazingly high winds for like 2 or 3 days straight, and they just couldn't. The winds were driving the fires, but also prevented getting any air support. And that's kind of, that's about. Literally a perfect storm. There's just nothing that can be done much on the ground at that point here. So it was difficult to watch as fires were just like raging and then spreading, and the whole city was really on edge for a while.
Horrible, but anyway, quick recovery to the area, and hopefully some nice unexpected money will come in for everyone.
I mean, I think if ever there was a part of the world that could face having a rebuild like that, it would be Los Angeles, frankly,
yeah,
right?
Sure.
Between the financial, overall financial stability and the relatively very good governance that we have here, it's, people things will happen quickly to fix it here, I
Good,
think.
good. Okay, so we sort of kicked around a lot of topics that I think are good, but I guess something that would be helpful for listeners, I guess in your own words, how you got into the business of law and in particular in helping the type of clients that are directly related to the unstarving musician.
I have practiced law for about 15 years now. And when I was in Canada for about 7 or 8 years, I was practicing very basic, not basic, but civil litigation. So we were doing insurance defense and things like that. At that time, I also was the administrator for an arts theater company and an arts festival. And so I had a lot of ties into the arts community and working with artists through that. In 2016, my family moved to Los Angeles and I started a Canadian immigration law firm. So helping people get into Canada. And for a long while, that practice was very general. I was helping, families relocate, students get student visas, work permits, kind of broad work. And then during COVID, I was connected in with a woman who runs a company called Global Access here in Los Angeles. They help people, mostly musicians and bands, get visas to go all over the world. And she was doing a lot of work for Canada, but because of COVID, her office essentially closed. She was still getting occasional questions about Canada. And so she connected with me. And from that time, I've basically, she's become a consistent referral source. And over the past 5 years, we've built up our own business through different channels. We work primarily with bands from around the world or musicians. A big part of the business that we do is helping people who have criminal convictions get into Canada. Canada has fairly serious laws around stopping people who have convictions, and so we help them get waivers. But we also assist people who are traveling in from outside of the United States who need, for example, a visa just to get on a plane to get to Canada. We deal also, to a lesser degree, film and television work permits for filming projects in Canada. And also, we help people who are in the United States get their Canadian citizenship and their Canadian passports, mostly within the entertainment industry, because that's where our connections are for that. So it's a really satisfying job. It's very creative, where it's very problem solving oriented as opposed to fighting. Like a lot of lawyer work is adversarial, it's combative, and really we're not in that situation. We have kind of parameters of an immigration structure, and then we work with our clients to get the desired result that they want, which is mostly going to Canada to play shows or film a show or whatever their work is. And I like to say we have the best clients. I really love connecting with artists and arts professionals around the world. It's really great to be part of sending musicians into Canada to connect with their audiences there. It's very satisfying to be part of the ecosystem of global arts.
That's nice. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about one of the topics we'd kicked around, which I wouldn't have thought of, but entering Canada with a criminal conviction. What are some of the things that you find that artists need to know more than anything, or that they may not know more than anything?
Right. That's sort of the big topic for people who are not international. I mean, it also applies to everyone, but it's really typically US musicians and artists who are going to face this issue, which is that Canada has very strict rules, and just about anything that would be a conviction in the United States, for example, or in Mexico or Australia, will trigger this for Canada. So theft, drug possession, drinking and driving, assault, like it doesn't have to be, in the US, they have a distinction between felonies and misdemeanors. It doesn't have to be a felony. It can be pretty much everything except for things like a speeding ticket, a parking ticket, driving without a license, those kinds of fairly minor motor vehicle things. But really anything else that will get you to court will probably trigger this. The reason that it's a particular issue for Americans is that Canadian immigration can see roughly what's on a person's FBI report. So even if somebody doesn't self-report going in, they may still get caught because the Canadian immigration authorities can see it as they're crossing the border. And people do get turned around. It depends how serious their issues are, if they've been warned before, things like that. The best case scenario is they get detained for hours at the border, which is never great when you're on a tour bus with all your colleagues and it's the middle of the night and you're trying to cross up to play a show. you don't want to be the guy who kept everybody stuck at the border for hours. The solution is that you can apply for a waiver. It's processed at the Canadian consulate here in Los Angeles. They process it usually like an expedited basis means that we have to get the application in about 2 weeks before someone needs to travel. But we have a very high success rate. In the past 4 years, I think we've only had 2 or 3 out of probably 1,000 applications denied. So working with us or, doing the process anyway, does get the result that you need, which is a waiver approval, which you take to the border and they issue a permit so that you can go in for the amount of time that you need to be there.
Is the legal aspect for immigration just like, okay, we kind of have record you're coming, we know you're here, it's not a surprise, and we know that you and your legal team understand whatever consequences of not playing by the rules here are?
Yeah, I mean, what it basically is that they, it's signaling we've gone, yeah, exactly. We've gone through the process. We got the permit that we're supposed to get, and here it is, and we played by the rules. If you show up to the border and ask for them to issue the permit without going through the pre-approval process, you're taking the risk that you're going to get somebody who doesn't know the law in a sophisticated way, which is entirely possible at the border, or they don't feel like doing it and their managers are not there. And if they see that you have a record, maybe they just turn you around because that's easier. Or again, best case scenario, you do get in, but you've now spent 3 or 4 or 5 hours, in secondary processing at the border, which nobody wants.
Yeah, which aggravates the tour bus.
Oh, you are nobody's favorite after that.
Right. You talked about work permits, or you mentioned them, and you mentioned visa requirements and the process of getting a visa. Is there more to add outside this sort of criminal conviction history?
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So we haven't really discussed work permits or visas, actually. Just until now, we've talked about the criminal conviction issue, which it applies to everyone. It applies to everyone, regardless of why they're going up, how long they're going up, what passport they're traveling on, any of it. That set of laws applies to anyone, whether they're going for a vacation or to move to Canada to work for 3 years. And so really anybody who has any kind of arrest history, conviction history, they should be aware that you want to get in front of it and find out if you're going to need a waiver, or if you're not going to need a waiver, at least come to the border with some paperwork that shows I had a charge, it was dismissed, that kind of thing. Like really, Canada takes it pretty seriously, and getting stuck at the border is not fun for anyone. So that's that. But I'll skip now if you'd like to work permits and visas, which is great for a more global audience. So in Canada, unlike the United States, doing live shows is work permit exempt.
Okay.
So
Wow.
you don't need a special work permit to go up and play music, to do stand-up comedy, to do theater, anything. Like as long as you're touring in as a foreign artist for a temporary amount of time, right? So you're not coming to live and like start a theater company, but you're touring a theater show, for example. All of that is work permit exempt. You'd want to show up at the border with contracts or an invitation letter from a presenter or something that confirms the purpose of your travel, but you don't need to apply for a work permit. So set that aside. Now we'll talk about entry requirements. So that's our visa issue. US citizens and US green card holders don't need anything to go up to Canada. They can fly or drive with just their passport or their passport and green card, as the case may be. People who are from visa required countries, so that's most of the countries in Africa, many of the countries in Asia, many of the countries in South America, Central America are visa required countries. They have to apply for a full, in this case, it would be a temporary resident visa, because they don't need a work permit. They just need a equivalent of a visitor visa to go in. And that requires fingerprinting and turning in a passport to the consulate to get stamped. So typically that takes anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks to kind of work its way through that system. It's not something that you can do at the last minute. Typically, they won't process in time. And then people who are from countries that don't require visas, so most of Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and a smattering of other countries, they can drive into Canada if, for example, they're already in the United States. They can drive into Canada with just their passport, or they can fly into Canada with what's called an electronic transit authorization. So that's similar to an American ESTA, an ETA.
Okay.
And that you get through an online application relatively quickly, kind of 24 to 48 hour approval window. And just to add extra confusion to the whole thing, there's about 10 countries who would typically require a full visa, but those people can get an ETA for flying into Canada if they've either had a Canadian visa in the past 10 years or they have a current US visa of any kind.
Okay.
So that's a really interesting opportunity, say, for people from Mexico, Argentina, Brazil, Philippines, Thailand, Morocco, a number of the Caribbean countries. If a person is already, not even already in the United States, but say they got a B1, B2 American visitor visa and they want to go to Canada, we can then apply for just the ETA for them to fly instead of doing the whole visa process. There's a couple different options. Again, I think like anything related to touring and travel, the key is to get out ahead of it, right? We occasionally hear from agents who have booked artists on tours across Canada and only after the fact and really close to departure realize that, oh, our artist who's based in the United States has an Indian passport, has a Chinese passport, and all of a sudden it's a race to get a visa so they can go up and play shows that are sold out, right? So that's kind of the quick and dirty of work permits not needed, visas may be needed, and criminal waivers possibly, depending on your situation, needed.
Okay. We've from the get-go of our conversations, we've talked a lot about like Canadian touring artists. Do you also work with artists that are, say, just going to the US, like from Mexico or other places?
I don't work directly with artists who need American immigration services. I have a lot of great colleagues here in the US who do that. I've kind of drawn a bright line there because it's just a different system, and
Sure.
it's easier for me to specialize in what I specialize in and to work in partnership. What we will do, and I think it's a great opportunity for groups that are setting up tours, is we'll work together and document share and make it sort of a streamlined process to apply for both the American and the Canadian visas simultaneously.
Okay.
What we've run into in recent years is that groups will book a tour with maybe 10 US dates and 1 or 2 Canadian dates, and they get heavily focused on getting their US visas organized because that's obviously it's kind of determinative of doing the tour. They get the US visas approved, clock is ticking down, and then they remember, oh, we also need Canada. And and again, we get kind of jammed, and also people aren't super happy to be paying another round of legal fees to be getting the Canadian visas to play 1 or 2 or 3 shows. So I always like to work with booking agents and say, look, if you're gonna do a tour, please put more than 1 Canadian date, because it just doesn't make sense for them to have to like go through the process and the expense of applying for the Canadian visas if they're only going to go up and play 1 show.
Yeah. Yeah.
The good news is that oftentimes Canada will, especially if somebody has an American visa, they'll issue a visitor visa that's good for 2 or 3 years. So even though you're only booked to play 1 show, you might get a visa that's good for several years, and then you can use that to return for subsequent tours.
Okay. Yeah, maybe if they're planning ahead even. Okay, let's see. Where were we? So general border crossing do's and don'ts.
Do take all the drugs off your bus. Don't fight with the immigration officer.
We run into this fairly regularly?
Not to be general about people and travel, but a lot of US citizens don't really consider going to Canada crossing a border, and they don't necessarily take it very seriously sometimes. It's not uncommon for people to be caught crossing the border with drugs that they may have acquired legally in the jurisdiction where they bought them. And certainly if they're legal somewhere in the United States, they're probably also legal in Canada, but crossing the border with them is going to be a problem. Similar, people who are traveling with guns. There's a lot of US citizens who legally own guns and can transport them legally in their vehicles, but you cannot just take a gun into Canada, or other types of weapons also, but guns. Touring musicians especially, should be aware that if they're coming up, you want to be ready to answer the basic questions of, where are you going? Where are you performing? Do you have contracts? That kind of thing. Canada, as far as passport requirements, doesn't require 6 months validity on your passport to get in, which is great. They do require that your passport is valid for the time that you're going, anticipating being in Canada. So, you don't want to show up with a passport that's about to expire. They may not let you in with a passport that's imminently going to expire. It's an international border crossing with people who have a lot of power, and it's very subjective. So you just want to be as ready to go with all of your documents and your ducks in a row as possible. Fortunately, it's not COVID times anymore, so we're not dealing with proof of vaccination or proof of COVID testing and things like that, which is one less thing to worry about. But apart from that, you do want to make sure that you know what's what. If you're driving a vehicle that's not your own, you want to make sure that you have the paperwork related to whose it is and why you have it. Vehicles with other people in it, you just don't want to have any surprises, right? At the end of the day, like all travel, you don't want to have any surprises. Know what's in your bags, know what's in your vehicle, know where you're going and who you're going to see.
I could see where people from the US, as you said, in some cases wouldn't really think as seriously about it maybe as they should. So
I grew up in the border, and it's very common on both sides of the border to pop over for shopping, to get gas. My mom lives in Canada, and she has a mailbox on the US side because it's easier for her to go and send certain things from the US side. It is a very friendly border in a lot of respects, but it's still an international border. And, if they decide to look, if somebody decides they're going to apply all the laws to you all at once, it can be a bad day.
yeah, we touched or talked by email a little bit about things that maybe don't get talked about a lot, but like insurance and liability considerations for international tours and coverage requirements and common gaps. Does your firm deal with any of that or advise clients on that kind of stuff?
It's not a topic that comes up so much. I actually reached out to a good friend of mine who's a booking agent in Canada because she's working a lot more with people on the ground about both of those issues. But it does come up. Typically, we're working with bands that have experienced tour managers. They've gone through this before. But it's always good for me to get up to speed and for other people to have information. So I did some research. So on insurance side, here's some thoughts. And I used to do insurance defense, so I do have an insurance brain anyway. If you're taking a vehicle in, probably your vehicle is going to be insured for incidental use in Canada. I would just sort of, from an insurance defense perspective, if you're using a personal vehicle and they get the impression that you're using it for commercial purposes, like you own a van and you're using it to drive a tour around, that may void your insurance policy, right? If you have an insurance policy that's for personal use and you're using it for commercial use, I would be aware of that. But generally speaking, US motor vehicle insurance is going to cover a motor vehicle that's being used in Canada.
Yeah.
That's one thing. Then, you want to think about liability insurance. So if you or your group cause damage somewhere, right? Your equipment is faulty and it catches fire and starts a fire in a theater, right? You're going to want liability insurance. So that's something you would talk to I would talk to an insurance broker about how you would acquire that. It's probably, for $500,000 of coverage for 2 weeks of touring, it's probably a nominal amount and not a bad thing to have in your pocket. I'm aware that some of the presenters in Canada, such as Live Nation, now make it a contractual obligation for the bands that they're presenting to have liability insurance. So I would read the contracts that you're getting from the promoters and presenters in Canada very carefully to see if you do in fact have an obligation to get that liability insurance in place. And then the last thing I would consider is health insurance. Maybe not for a short, 1 or 2 day run up to Canada, but if you're touring across Canada, and you're driving across the whole country or something like that, having a Blue Cross health insurance policy, something similar to that, like a traveler's health insurance policy available to you so that you can get medical care, see a doctor, all that kind of stuff in case something comes up is probably not a bad idea. Although the booking agent I talked to yesterday about it, she said, look, somebody gets sick enough that they need medical care, they're just going to cancel the whole tour and send them home anyway. So,
Yeah.
it kind of depends, where you think you might need medical insurance. It might be overkill. It might be, that you wouldn't ever bother to seek medical treatment or much of it in Canada anyway.
Right.
So,
Yeah, I guess there's the question of unforeseen accidents that would require medical attention just to get you in a stable situation, or I mean, could even be an unforeseen health incident. So,
well, exactly. So, I mean, I think it's worth, if you're planning a tour to Canada, it's worth certainly like thinking about pricing it out. If you want to, go on a cost risk basis, right? And you're like, health insurance, it's going to cost this much. We don't really think we're going to need it. We'll take the chance of needing to pay out of pocket for healthcare in Canada. At least
yeah.
right?
Yeah, or at the very least, assuming you have coverage of some sort already, just making the calls to find out what happens in the event that you need emergency medical care and potential transport back to the US, for example. So it's good to know those things.
Yeah, absolutely. If you have an American private insurance policy with Kaiser or wherever, call and find out.
Yep.
At least know. Sometimes they have international numbers available that you'd want to just have available, in your pocket in case something came up.
Sure.
It's good to do your homework.
You'd mentioned that Live Nation's now contractually requiring some liability coverages. Is that kind of new? Because I assumed, well, I didn't assume anything about Live Nation specifically, but assumed that there were just like venues and perhaps these organizations like Live Nation that would require it just standard. But is that something that's a little bit new for them?
Well, I mean, as far as I've heard, I haven't dealt with I haven't been contracted by Live Nation, I guess I should say, at all. And so I haven't seen that requirement. That was news that I was given by the promoter I was talking
Okay.
to get up to speed. So I think it is relatively new. I think how it's going to work is that everybody wants to have layers of insurance, right? So, the venue owner is going to have insurance, the presenter is going to have insurance, and, the band or the musician should also have a layer of insurance, because ultimately what happens, realistically in the legal world is that, let's go back to that scenario of there's a fire at the venue, right? Let's say there's a fire at the venue. We don't even know what caused it. Somebody got hurt, property damage, personal injury, whole mess. And it's I used to work in Nova Scotia. So let's say it's in Nova Scotia. Well, whoever got hurt is going to hire a personal injury lawyer, and they're going to do their job, and they are going to name everyone they can, right? They're going to name the venue. They're going to name the presenter. They're going to name the band that was playing in there, because that way everybody is theoretically liable, and then you sort it out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it was mostly the venue that was at fault. Maybe they had a faulty electrical system that led to the fire. Maybe it was the presenter who was at fault. Somebody brought in an outside something that caught fire. Like, who knows, right? But they're going to name everyone. And as soon as everyone is named, you have to defend yourself, right? So even if you're not at fault, even if you had nothing to do with it, you're going to have the cost of filing documents in court, being part of the court process. And if you don't have insurance, you're going to have to hire a lawyer out of pocket to do that, or risk getting a default judgment, or, have to take it on yourself. So the value of having liability insurance as a traveling artist would be in the hopefully very unlikely event that something happens during a show and you get sued along with everybody else. You have insurance to rely on that will then appoint a lawyer and go and defend you. And it doesn't cost you anything. That's what the insurance is for. And eventually it'll all come out in the wash that you had nothing to do with this. And maybe you get dropped from the lawsuit early, or maybe it goes to court and you get found without having any liability. But you can see how that could take years, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To get to the bottom of something. And meanwhile, everyone and their dog is named on that lawsuit until it becomes clear who's actually responsible for it.
Yeah. There's a lot of different ways that can ruin a career.
There's a lot of ways that can ruin a career. So, for the relatively low cost, and it's probably, a couple $100, it was probably not shocking to get some liability insurance coverage, at the very least, just to defend yourself, even if you're not at fault for something that happens.
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking of a couple of specific cases, both of which you may be familiar with, but they did happen some time ago. Many years ago, I believe it was a band, White Stripe, was involved in a live performance where I believe it was cited, at least in the media at the time, that their pyrotechnic show caused a fire, which basically trapped everyone inside the venue, and everyone died, or most that I know of. And I'm just sitting here thinking for the first time about the people that are sort of outside of that immediate situation that get pulled into illegal, and basically the people that were left, which, I mean, well, I guess the band management, there's some of that team, but there's certainly the presenter team and the venue, which may have been completely destroyed, and that was the end of them, but I don't know. And then another one was actually a high school friend of mine who was a member of Pantera, and he was shot in a venue and killed, and there were other people hurt. And this was in the U.S. And so, yeah, I can imagine again, like all the legal wheels that start turning for people.
Well, that's it. I mean, really, just in the legal world, because you have statutes of limitation, because there's a time frame in which you must bring a lawsuit against someone, the approach is to name everyone you can.
Right away.
Right? Name everyone you can, and then it all kind of comes out in the wash through the court process, which is why we have court processes, frankly. But it does inevitably sweep up people who aren't going to be liable, but there's going to be a cost associated with getting out of that process. And if you're insured, your insurance company should appoint legal counsel to do that for you, right? And if you're not insured, then you're paying out of pocket for that, right?
Yeah.
Which is not what anybody wants to do. So
no, or even think
liability insurance. Who would have thought we'd be talking about liability insurance?
I know, or even think about. Are there things, switching gears, are there things that we should touch on that around work authorization for all the support people that are involved in a tour, like crew, staff, tech teams, engineers,
Not
roadies?
for traveling music. Really, everybody who's involved in a traveling touring show, as long as they kind of fit in the umbrella of like critical crew, critical management, are work permit exempt. So it really can be very widely construed. You think about these huge tours like Taylor Swift's tour. Even the third-party merch contractors are up there without work permits. Because they're considered part of this touring production.
Okay. So I assume, though, that within all the different scenarios that we've talked, and then some we haven't talked about, there's still the whole visa entry requirements and all that for everyone that's moving across the border.
Right. So again, it comes down to, you want to think about, so let's assume you're going only for music touring purposes. There's no work permit requirement. Then you're going to want to look at, well, what passport are you traveling up on, right? So U.S. passport, no issues. Mexican passport now has a problem. I'm not sure if you are aware of that. That's a relatively new change, and it's catching people off guard. It used to be that people traveling on Mexican passports were also had the same kind of freedom of travel as, or they could fly, rather, I should dial this back. They could drive over the border without a visa, and they could fly in with an ETA, and every Mexican passport holder was eligible to get an ETA. And about 6 months ago, maybe a little more now, close to a year, Canada changed that requirement. And now Mexico is considered a visa required country for Canada. But it's also part of that list of people who can get an ETA if they've had a past Canadian visa or a current US visa.
Okay.
And so where this plays out, for example, was I got a call last October by a Canadian promoter who had a Mexican band that was touring in the United States and then were scheduled to drive over the border to play shows in Vancouver. Very common, right? Drive from Seattle up to Vancouver, play some shows. And they got stopped at the border because they had no visas. They would have been eligible to fly in, right? Because they would have had an American visa to be in the United States playing shows. They probably had P1s or maybe O1s, right? So if they're in the United States playing shows, they would have had a US visa. They would have been eligible to get an ETA and fly from Seattle to Vancouver, but they couldn't just on Mexican passports drive into Vancouver.
Yeah.
So that was, I mean, that was unfortunate because that was a relatively recent change. It wasn't well publicized. It's not something that, promoters would be necessarily aware of, not something the band members would have been aware of. And it really kind of derailed a chunk of this tour because they got turned around at the border unexpectedly.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
that's a change that people should be aware of, especially if they're already in the United States on Mexican passports.
Okay.
Or Brazilian or Argentinian, all of these countries, right?
Okay. Are
Mhm.
there qualifiers, for lack of a better word, that we should mention for people who get interested in this topic and think about calling you, for instance, like and I say qualifier, I just kind of mean like the type of tour or artists that you're working with, some things that would let them know that, yeah, you're a good phone call, or maybe for
Oh,
some
sure.
reason you're
I
not.
mean, we work with artists and crew and the truck drivers and bus drivers and management. So we're of groups of all sizes. So,
Okay.
we've worked with people who are touring with some of the biggest artists out on tour, and we have worked with, you know, five guys who get together, and go on tour in a van, right?
Mhm.
And we really we do our best to help everyone to make it affordable to everyone. I really want to support people to be able to go up and reach their audiences in Canada. The real key for us is to get as much time as possible because we can do better work. We can offer better solutions if we've got more time. And, to the extent that, if someone comes to me on very short notice and says, I need to go up and I really, and then I give them a price and they go, ooh, I'm like, but I don't even have time to spread it out for you at that point, right?
Mhm.
But if somebody comes to me 3 or 4 months before the tour and says, I have to go, I need to be in Canada in September, well, then we have time to like build in a payment plan or, work out something that makes it, more manageable for them from a financial perspective.
Mhm.
Um, so it's just always nice to have more time frankly,
S-
to be able to help people. But we really work with everyone, not just the musicians. We work with the front of house guys and the backline guys and the set carpenters and the riggers, and
Okay.
it's great. We work with everybody.
So is it safe to say that 3 months is a good rule of thumb for lead time for people
Three
to?
months is a great rule of thumb. I mean, the situation that we have is that we need to be filing for people who need waivers, criminal and admissibility waivers. We have to file those at least 2 weeks before they travel.
Okay.
It's going to take us at least 2 weeks to put an application together. If somebody comes to me less than a month before they're traveling to Canada, we do our best, but it's not our best work, right?
Mhm.
It's, we try to put something together and we cross our fingers and we hope that that gets it over the line for them. And it's not fun for them, frankly,
Sure.
because we're like pushing them we need to get character letters. We need to get you on the phone to talk about your your statement. We need to send you to get fingerprinted to get your FBI report. And if somebody's gearing up to go on tour, or maybe they're already on tour, right? Maybe they have started a tour and they have a Canada date a month in, right? I mean, we work with people on the road all the time, but it's nobody's favorite way of getting things done,
Right. Yeah.
right? The more time that we have, the better. 3 months is ideal. We can do more. If people are expecting to need a visa, 3 months is about the minimum. We can do it on a shorter turnaround, but we have to book fingerprinting appointments. They need to find a window to turn their passport in for stamping. It gets, that part gets a little more cumbersome. Especially a lot of musicians are, again, on the go, right? It's hard for a musician to give up their passport for a week sometimes,
Sure.
depending on who they are. But we've helped artists from all, like, there's not a country we haven't helped people from. We've helped artists from Russia, India, Nigeria, Ghana, Colombia. So, like, all over the place. We have a great team. We are great at working with people, all around. We really, because we work almost exclusively with artists and mostly musicians, we understand that world. And we like working with artists who are, on the go and doing different things. But because it's people's lives are a little more unpredictable, the more time we have, then the nicer everyone's experience of it will be.
Sure. Are there any things that entertainers would want to know that are going to trigger cost related, elevating related things?
I mean, I would, a general rule of thumb for me is if you've ever been arrested and fingerprinted, you should, and you're in the United States at least, go get your FBI report. There's a link on our website for doing it, but there's different, if you Google like get FBI report, there's different ways to do it.
Okay.
Go and get it for your own personal, look and see what's on it. A lot of times people will be very surprised to see what's on their FBI report because they're not always complete. So sometimes it will show charges, but it won't show that the charges were dismissed. Sometimes people think they've had things expunged or sealed and they still show up on the FBI report. Find out what's on there. We offer a service where we'll do a free consultation on an FBI report. If somebody sends me an FBI report, I will get on the phone and talk to them about what it is and whether they're going to have issues getting into Canada, and to help them strategize around that. And that's a no cost thing other than getting the FBI report. And we do that because I hate to hear people having problems at the border unexpectedly.
Sure.
Right. We can offer tips, if they don't want to hire us to help them, here's some tips. Good luck,
Yeah.
But I just hate to hear people having trouble, and I'd rather they, get in touch, take advantage of a free consultation to get, some information before they go to the border. Don't be surprised. Similarly to travel, we hear, I have a good relationship with a lot of tour managers, and they pick up, these bigger tours with artists or a crew from all over the world, and they just send me a list. They're like, here, these are the passports we have.
Okay.
Are we going to have any issues, or give me a heads up? And I'd much rather have somebody reach out a few months ahead of a tour going into Canada so we can strategize. It takes me not long to go over that list and talk to them about it. We don't charge for that. I'm happy to be part of the team, right?
Yeah.
Nobody, Live Nation has lawyers on staff, but nobody else does. And, I think it's nice to be part of the team. When the time comes for somebody to be getting an application or a visa or something, then we start, talking about fees. But for just like casual conversation about strategies and information, we're pretty open for that. Ultimately, we charge what we charge because the work is the same. We don't bill higher for a larger tour, but we do, especially if we have time, we can build in ways to spread out payments and things like that to make it work. I'm certainly not interested in making people starve to get back to the reason we're here. I want artists to make money. I want them to have money in their pocket. We work with people to make it feasible for them to hire us to do our work.
That's great. Is there anything that we didn't cover, or any calls to action or messages you want to leave with my listening audience? Which I don't know if I'd mentioned, but I have some that are just music industry, not just independent musicians, but a lot of independents and industry people.
For anybody of sort of regardless of their size or where they fit into the spectrum, I would say touring into Canada is different from touring to the United States. It's worth checking out the immigration components. It's worth checking out, the other issues of being in Canada around, insurance and things like that. I would say also just for the industry level people, if there's, especially if you're talking with like booking agent level people, if you're booking a Canada US tour for people, please try to book them multiple shows in Canada.
Right.
Especially if they need visas, right? So if we're talking about groups that are coming from South America, from African countries, from most Asian countries, if they're going to need a visa, let's make it worth their while to pay for that work to get done. And if they only have one show in Canada and 10 in the United States, it's just like that cost is hard for them to swallow. So it's just being mindful about those kinds of things. And, I think otherwise just, reach out, right? Like I'm here, there's other people in the industry who are doing touring, who do immigration for entertainment professionals. And, we all want to see people succeed, and we all want to work with people who want to get results. And I'd much rather talk to somebody, 6 months out and strategize and have them say, okay, we're going to go and get our funding in order, get picked up for whatever. And, and then come back to me in 3 months and say, okay, we're ready to go.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So, again, like I said, I'd rather be part of the team. Make me part of the conversation. Let me help you strategize about the Canada part of it, and I think everybody will have a much better time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great. And I take it that mundiallaw.com is probably the best way to get in touch and find out
Yeah,
more about you.
that's a great place to go. There's a direct reach out form on there that comes into us. There's other contact information there, and a lot of actually free download resources. There's links to how to get your FBI report. There's more information on visas, on criminal inadmissibility, lots of good starting points. And then, of course, just reach out. Please reach out.
That's great. Okay, cool. Well, thank you so much for spending time with me. You would be, I think I've had another attorney on the podcast, but not with this area of expertise and specialization. So, and I watch a lot of my guests, former guests, touring all over the place. And so I'm sure that we'll catch a few that are on the cusp of doing one they haven't done before or going to Canada for the first time, and this would be helpful for them.
I'm really glad to hear that. Like I said, it makes me really happy to help people take their music into Canada and reach Canadian audiences. And whatever we can do to help facilitate that from an immigration perspective, we're happy to do.
Very nice. All right, cool. I think it'll be great info for everyone listening.
Great. Well, it's so nice to meet you,
Yeah.
and thanks for responding to my inquiry. I'm really happy to be connecting with musicians, and it sounds like you're really reaching a broad kind of spectrum of people and a more global spectrum of people, which I think is very, very cool.
Yeah, we
So,
try. We try. And
no,
yeah,
it's really great.
I get a lot of solicitations, and for whatever reason, well, I'm sure part of it was that I haven't talked about this topic before, and obviously there was just something nice about your outreach, so I appreciate it. Most people get steered to a form to fill out that I try. I try to look at. I'm doing more solo episodes these days too, but I'm going through a string of interviews right now. Speaking of which, if I stay on schedule and don't either accelerate my production schedule or have some sort of unanticipated insertion ahead of you or delay, your
Sure.
episode will be out in the first part of April.
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah.
Super.
Okay,
Hey,
cool.
I have a question to ask you.
Mhm.
So I'm looking at some of the like industry events and trying to reach out to them to see if they'd be interested in doing like panels for upcoming conferences and events. Are there any in particular that you think are well attended or well operate, that would be responsive to an inquiry from me?
Well, I mean, obviously, NAM is a good one. I think that
Yeah.
we missed, or that one's passed.
Yeah,
But
it just went by, yeah.
I wonder if some of the songwriter festivals might be
Okay.
good, and some of the awards things that happen in music might be good. I don't know if they're all nichey, but like there's an organization that does the blues awards, and then there are a couple of regional songwriting festivals that I have in my notes I could find. If you would like me to look for those, if you just send me a little reminder.
Absolutely. That would be such a big help. I'd really appreciate that. I'm just trying to, because when you're starting sort of from the outside, you're like, ooh, I don't really know what's a legit, organization or a legit event. And it would be great to connect with some that really do draw industry folks or, artists who are getting ahead and making go. I think the songwriter idea is great because those artists do start to move around once they hit kind of a mid-career level.
Mm-hmm.
And also the awards. I hadn't thought of awards, but I guess they do operate kind of industry stuff on the side of an awards event,
Yeah,
usually.
they certainly might vendor sort of booth things, or if that's what you might be looking at it along with other opportunities like speaking or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, and there's one, oh yeah, there's one. I know there's a big something that happens in Austin, and I'm forgetting the name, but I'll make a note to myself to look for that too. And I know that one's largely industry and
Is that
actual
like
artists.
South by Southwest or
There's
something else?
another one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's another one, and I assume it's still going, although I haven't heard about it. It feels like now in a couple of years, but that may just be because I got out of the loop somehow. But
Right.
I'll keep an eye
That would
open.
be really fantastic.
Hmm.
Do you think there's an organization in Mexico that would be interested in hearing on things?
Quite possibly. I only know at this time, well, I mean, I have my music community here in Querétaro, and then I know some folks in Mexico City largely because of a blues artist that has toured here or
Okay.
has come and played some shows. I guess is qualifies mini tour, but yeah, could be. But I'll ask those folks. Maybe they'll ask around for me, and I'll
Yeah, I
keep
mean,
an
that
eye.
would be great. I'm just like mostly, I think Canada's a good market, and Canada, I think, is a place where like once people it's got a great live audience market actually, and it's got a lot of venues, and people can play kind of a range of tours up there. It's not necessarily, you don't have to be a stadium artist to go to Canada by any stretch. Canada also has a big festival scene, right? It's got a huge summer jazz festival, music festival scene. Um, and they have some good arts presenter organizations I should circle back to as well. But um, it's just nice to like it's nice to help people get their career moving in that way and not just
Sure.
reliant on the US market for sure. Um, or
Hmm.
if you're going to come into the US market, you're already if you're going to Seattle, you might as well go to Vancouver. If you're going to Detroit, you might as well go into Ontario. There's a lot of easy ways to make more money, reach more audiences.
And it's funny. I know, and all the time I've been doing the podcast, I have heard an occasional mention of the artists going into Canada, like from the U.S., for instance. But I don't hear it a lot, and I just wonder if my audience either if I just miss it, or if my audience kind of overlooks it, or there's just some hesitation that knowing more about the kind of things that you do would help. I mean, I wouldn't think so because I see a lot of these folks going to Europe, and this one gentleman who's coming to Mexico, and he goes to Japan. So I would think he's been to Canada, but
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have, but I also think it's a country that you mostly need to work with. Like, you need to work with a booking agent of some sort there, whether it's a Canadian booking agent or whether you're working with like a North American booking agent who has the connection to do both. Or if you reach a certain size and you're working with Live Nation or whatever. But um, it's maybe a little harder to do on the fly.
sure.
It would be harder to do as an independent musician, I'm pretty sure, but there's lots of big cities, medium-sized cities, lots of opportunities to reach audiences in Canada.
Yeah, even though I think that um, if there are no plans to tour Canada, it still sort of gives you some insight in the things you need to be thinking about and realize that, oh, there's probably a lot of stuff I need to know that I'm just, I got to look into because I'm not going to learn from this conversation exactly.
Well, that's exactly it. Like a lot of it for me is just, hey, it doesn't hurt to get ahead of things, right? It doesn't hurt to get ahead of thinking about insurance. It doesn't hurt to think about, you know, um, do you have a criminal, history that you want to double check on before you take a run to go to the border? Like all that kind of stuff. But
Yeah.
there's lots of tours going to Canada, so lots of opportunities for people to have a great time there.
Yeah, it was refreshing to hear that there was something you said that reminded me that the support for the arts is pretty strong or has been traditionally in Canada. So,
It really is. I mean, the most of the summer festivals have huge public and like private sponsorship funding, right? And for that reason, within reason, ticket prices are kept manageable, right? The arts are kept very accessible because there's big public funding for the arts.
oh, that's
A
good.
lot of the arts.
So,
Yeah.
manageable as in better than the US ticket prices?
Well, I mean, Taylor Swift is still Taylor Swift in Canada,
Uh-huh.
but festivals that are, have a big chunk of their support coming from public grant systems and corporate sponsorships. Yeah, those, you can take the family to go see a show and it's not going to be a $2,000 event, right?
Yeah,
You
there
can-
was a show, a festival I had the opportunity to play in a state called Zacatecas here in Mexico
Mhm.
with this traveling blues artist I mentioned. And I was really amazed. Free show. They brought in bands from, you know, South America and elsewhere. And here was this guy from the US. And, it was a free event. And it was a super nice production. They backlined everything, and the stage presentations were super nice. And I saw some wonderful bands there. And I was only there for one full night of a show that was several days. So yeah, I guess it's
Oh, that's
nice that
very
those still
cool.
exist. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Canada does have a lot of that. Canada has a, like I said, especially in the summer, big festival network,
Oh, cool.
right? Huge jazz festivals all across the country. And, you can get a day pass for it's probably $100 or something. Like, it's feasible,
Yeah.
right? Which is nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you can see good shows and it's a nice the Canadian government and the provincial governments, they want arts, they want culture, they want, opportunities for international artists to come into Canada. They want opportunities to platform Canadian artists and get them, bigger audiences and more reach also. So
It's nice to hear because often I feel the arts, not by the general public per se, but just in the attention war and also things outside of that, sometimes with governments, that the arts are um, badly underappreciated these days. But yeah, I know that with the general public, it's not the case. I mean, people still love music and art and all these things.
I think people have lost, how can I put it? They love watching TV, they love movies, they love listening to music, and they forget that there's skilled people who produce that
Hmm.
and who need to pay their bills too, right? That there is, a lot of value in, arts education in all the levels, I think, of, arts and culture and communities. And especially, in my case, platforming diverse voices, platforming more, diversity, minority artists, people who haven't typically had main stage opportunities is a lot of what interests me. I mean, we work for everybody, obviously, but but the more that I can hear about, hey, let's take this kind of artist who's never been up to Canada before. Well, let's work on it. Let's make it work. This is a great part about being self-employed, right? I can cut whatever deal I want to to help an artist. We were working, I actually was on a call Monday with a guy who runs a big EDM festival in Colombia and is kind of and works also as an artist manager. So he finds the artists, develops them, gets them, national and international touring opportunities. And he came to me and he said, we've got this artist, he's got opportunities in Canada. The cost of your visa is, roughly what he's going to get paid because this is his first show outside of Colombia. And I said, well, here's how we're going to do it, right? I don't want him to not go. And I don't want them to risk screwing up his visa and he has to cancel because it doesn't get approved in time. If he's going to blow up, then I'll invest also in, making it feasible to say, look, we're going to do it at this rate for this visa. And because he's going to get to play more shows on that visa, most likely, then when he books more shows on that visa, you'll pay me more.
Yeah.
But I can do that. I don't have a boss. I get to make those decisions and it's very satisfying.
Cool. Well, it's great talking with you.
Really nice talking to you too. Good luck with getting everything done. I hope you have a nice time with your visitors and enjoy the rest of your week.
All right, you too. We'll talk soon. As an independent podcaster, your support means the world to me. You could even say that I depend on it. With that in mind, here are some things you can do to help support us. Follow us on your favorite podcast app. You can leave us a review on your favorite podcast app, or just shoot me a review by email at rabonzo@unstarvingmusician.com. I can use that kind of stuff on the website. Or just share this episode with a friend. This all has a big impact on our audience growth. You can also visit unstarvingmusician.com to learn about other ways of supporting the podcast, including a quick and easy tip jar. It's like click, tip, done. Super easy and super appreciated. You'll find many other ways to support us there, including through our affiliate partners like Bandzoogle, ConvertKit, DreamHost, and more. The music you're hearing, by the way, is New Gods Part 2, the instrumental mix by yours truly. You can hear, download, and or buy the full version with vocals by yours truly at rabonzo.com. If all that was too much to remember or process, just go to the show notes for this episode at unstarvingmusician.com to find links to all this and the stuff I'll talk about in today's episode, or the stuff I already talked about in today's episode. You can leave us feedback, questions, comments, complaints at unstarvingmusician.com/feedback. Thank you for listening. Peace, love, and a whole lot of gratitude.